Tonight we look at the fastest skill pathways to permanent residency. What are the current fastest growing jobs in Australia? How the government's crackdown on international students is creating the perfect storm. Will Tony Burke be any better than the now defunct dynamic duo of Oniel and Giles? And how the TRA is trying to fast-track construction occupation skill assessments. Hi, I'm Karl Konrad and welcome to our weekly edition of Australian Immigration News. With only 1 week away from the desk, it seemed like an eternity, but I hope the video about the TRT stream of the ENS visa helped fill the void. Jobs and Skills Australia released its updated Australian labour market for migrants report. This annual snapshot gives some interesting insights regarding the outcomes of migrants in Australia and visa patterns. A key statistic of interest for migrants is what are the major job growth trends in Australia. Their graph here clearly demonstrates that the demand for healthcare and social assistant workers dwarfs every other sector. Education and training and construction comes in a distant second and third place, but still way ahead of the rest. The report also gives us a snapshot of the fastest avenues migrants use to gain their permanent residency. As you can see in this fancy flow diagram here, the JSA figures show that there are 5 main pathways for skilled migration for permanent residency in Australia. Offshore using the skilled independent category were 20.3%. The temporary skilled visa holders, meaning the 482 and the 457, to employer-sponsored category was 18.9%. Those offshore who used the state territory nominated were 14.2%. Student visa holders to the skilled independent were 7.9%, and student visa holders to the state territory nominated categories was 6.6%. Now, the amount of time it took them and the number of steps necessary to achieve their PR goal was very interesting. This graph outlines the data on the number of steps taken to the transition to permanent residency for all the skill stream migrants who arrived in Australia between 2012 and 2021. The graph indicates that those who arrived on a temporary skilled 457 and 482 visa made the most seamless and shortest transition to permanent residency, with the large majority making the transition in one step, 85.8% of them, and the average time span just under 3 years. The graph also indicates that relatively few of those who first arrived on student visas made the transition in one step, only 16.1%, with most transitioning in 2 or 3 steps, 73.3%, in an average time span of 4.5 years. Now, few of those who first arrived on a working holiday visa made the transition to permanent residency in one step, in fact only 11.9%, with most again transitioning in 2 or 3 steps, but slightly less time span than the students, at an average time span of just under 4.5 years. In my absence last week, the Minister of Home Affairs, Claire O'Neill, and the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, were removed from their posts. Claire O'Neill presided over some terrible decisions which caused thousands of people pain and suffering. These included international students who were duped into studying for master's degrees on the promise of longer graduate visas, denying graduates their promised Australian work visas simply because they're over 35, making visa applicants wait for years for processing, then just discard their applications without warning or compensation, and then finally, the departing disaster introduced legislation which has already caused significant damage to the education industry. They left their ministerial offices paychecks in hand, whilst Australia's reputation has been trashed. It is no longer a country you can rely on to do the right thing by our international visitors. Let's hope the new Minister, Tony Burke, can do a better job, but his starting comments are already ringing alarm bells. And more on that later. Andrew Giles has been shifted to the Skills and Training Minister, so now he has the capacity to fix the long skill assessment processing delays for those using the Job Ready program after their studies in Australia. And speaking of Trade Recognition Australia, they announced while I was away that priority would be given to certain construction occupations by eliminating the offshore skill assessment program for most construction trades. However, this is only for certain low-risk country passport holders with Australian or equivalent overseas qualifications in the trade for which they seek assessment. Already on the 1st of July, the TRA announced it was giving priority to all the skill assessment pathways for these construction trade occupations. This additional announcement will provide passport holders from those listed countries. They can now use the simpler and cheaper migration skill assessment pathway instead. Please use the link in the description to read the announcement of these changes on the TRA website. The threat of introducing the capping student visa legislation hit the headlines this week when the Senate inquiry was held regarding the merits of such a move. The government has proposed a bill that will give them the power to cancel CRICOS registered courses and limit the proportion of international students compared with local students. The university representatives had their chance to highlight how the draconian legislation would decimate the education sector and cause the loss of tens of thousands of jobs. Vicky Thompson, the chief executive of the Group of Eight, which includes the University of Sydney and Melbourne University, the most powerful universities in Australia, led off this fiery remark.
They are draconian, interventionist, and amount to economic vandalism.
She is also quoted in this week's Financial Review as saying, "The very spectre of this legislation is already trashing Australia's international reputation. It will trash our universities and trash our economy. It beggars belief." In addition, at the inquiry, Universities Australia's COE called out the legislation for what it is.
We believe the bill, as drafted, is more a political smokescreen than an instrument for good policy.
It is important to note that the government is no longer pushing the line that we have too many international students. The latest figures on international student visa grants demonstrate the numbers have fallen back to pre-pandemic levels. The federal government has now shifted to a very misleading approach, saying this legislation is required to weed out dodgy providers who exploit international students. This was evidenced at the Senate inquiry this week.
This exploitation can range from providing poor quality education products to high student fees and false promises of pathways to permanent migration.
If it is aimed at dodgy providers, then of course the universities would have no reason to be upset, since they do not partake in such practices. If we're talking about bringing in these new laws to tackle dodgy providers, are they then necessary? The simple answer is, of course, no, they are not. The government already has an arsenal of rules to cancel dodgy providers, beginning with ASQA, who approves and monitors such educational institutions. The national regulator is there for a specific purpose: to regulate, to control, and to monitor. It charges an enormous annual fee to all education providers to fund its monitoring mandate. This is to ensure they are keeping the quality of Australian education under tight control. And don't just take my word for it.
ASQA is the national regulator for vocational education and training. We work with training providers so that students, employers, governments and the community can have confidence in the integrity of national training qualifications.
So there you go. They conduct their duty so we can all have confidence in the integrity of nationally obtained qualifications. Trying to put caps on international student numbers and proclaiming it's there to protect the integrity of the education system makes no sense. Unfortunately, the new Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, seems determined to maintain this untenable position for the foreseeable future.
There's a few other issues too. A push to overturn current policy settings which limit the number of international students, something which the nation's top universities say it's damaging the sector, it's having huge economic repercussions for them. Will you consider changing this?
Look, they've said in the media that they want to meet with me. I always meet with stakeholders, so I'll meet with them. I'm very relaxed about that. But certainly I support the government's policy, and we've made the policy for the right reasons. If there's tweaking that they want to talk to me about, we'll have the conversation, but it's not a disposition that I come with. The integrity of the student visa program really did need to be cleaned up, and the decisions that were made there by Claire Oniel, by Andrew Giles, by Jason Clare are all decisions that were made in the national interest for the right reasons, and I support them.
Yes, the whole country is behind you, Tony, to maintain the integrity of the student visa system. Absolutely. But what has that got to do with placing caps on the number of students universities can enrol? Does the country have to suffer the same pain as the UK, which has already lost an estimated of about £1 billion since having a stricter student visa rule? Or are we going to end up like Canada, which has already imposed a student visa cap and is now facing the prospect that it cannot even reach its reduced target? The loss of trust in the system means international students are looking elsewhere. Unfortunately, the government still does not get the message. Students will begin to look elsewhere when you erode their trust in the country's visa system. Don't think you can avoid the consequences after destroying the dreams of thousands of international students who chose to study here and later telling them that they're too old to get the graduate work visa. Younger international students and their parents who are looking at Australia can see what's been happening. And now this issue of capping and cancelling courses is creating the perfect storm for our education sector. It's been a busy week back and I'm afraid I've not had the time to get to the comments, but I will do my best this weekend. You may notice I am most active over the weekends answering questions, so the sooner you watch our video and make your comment will be the best chance I'll get back to you. As always, if you need help, we are here to assist. Book a consultation online via our website. If it's a while before there is a space, call the office and talk to Pat and Hay, two delightful real people who will see if they can squeeze you in earlier. As always, take care out there and I will see you next time. So bye for now.